questions. Number 1. Why do atheists usually blame religious people? For what? Have you done something lately? Should I blame you for something? I don't quite know where you're going with that. I don't think a religious person, for the most part, would do anything that a non-religious person would do every once in a while. And the tragedy of it strikes us because it is a rare occurrence. Somebody decides that blowing themselves up and killing other people because they believe that they are promised a reward in the afterlife, that I can blame solely on a religious person. And it's a tragedy in such a great way that I don't even want to think about it. But that's probably the only example I can think of where I could blame a religious person for something that just a regular person wouldn't do. Number 2. Who created the universe? Of course, in the asking of the question, you're assuming who? You're assuming an entity of some type. I think that the premise of the question is unfounded, and that why assume that there's an entity at all? Of course you do, because you're religious, but someone like me who's not religious looks around and doesn't necessarily see the need for an entity to explain. So right off the bat, who, you're assuming a lot by asking who. And I would say, specifically to the rigid way in which you form the question, no one created the universe. We can go into the physics of white hole events or unstable instances in a multiverse creating explosions of space-time and matter, but none of that answers your question. Number 3. Why is the design of creation very complicated? The design of creation. You're talking about right now in the slice of time when you look around and you see things that are very complicated. Probably the most complicated things in the entire universe are organisms, like us, like plants, like insects, like fuzzy little hamsters. They're probably the most complicated types of things in the universe. Things like planets and stars and black holes are actually quite simple in comparison. Not the same complexity of moving parts. But why is everything so complicated? Well, we've got this system with a bunch of parts in it, and rules about how those parts interact, and time. Eventually you get complicated systems. This is actually can be expressed better mathematically than with words, and you could probably have hours and hours of lectures about how complicated things emerge from systems with basic elements and rules that guide their behavior. In a 10-minute YouTube video, I don't have enough time to come across that. But in the way that you're asking it, you're kind of begging the question. You're kind of be like, see, that's an example of God. That's an example of God. And I can say honestly that I don't see it that way. It is not a clear example of God. You're going to have to give me a better example. Number 4, the purpose of life. The purpose of life. Guess what? We get to make it up our own. Kind of a reward and a burden of having fairly complicated brains, and that we actually worry about stuff like this. It's not just about survival. It's not just about eating and breeding and sleeping. We think about other things, vague, non-tactile things like purpose. Well, guess what? You don't need to read a 2,000-year-old book that some person wrote in order to find purpose to your life. You get to make it up as you go. I find that, helping people and loving and being loved is enough. 5. Why does humanity have a desire to worship someone?